it theoretically gave, all citizens the right to vote in America.
I would say the right to vote for everyone, whether they're black, white, Asian, Hispanic.
The Constitution states that the 15th Amendment is the right of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on the account of race, color, or previous condition of servitude.
The 15th Amendment was created after the Civil War during the Reconstruction era, February 3, 1870. This era was a time of distress because even though the slaves were freed after the war, they had nothing. Reconstruction failed, therefore the 15th Amendment was not actually enforced as well as it should have been until about 100 years until after it was ratified.
When we passed the 15th Amendment, a huge portion of the country didn't follow it anyway. It took 100 years for people to enforce the 15th Amendment. So if we had done it 50 years prior to this, prior to that moment, it would have been irrelevant because the people who weren't voting 50 years prior to the 15th Amendment weren't considered people in the first place, so they still wouldn't have been covered under the 15th Amendment. We still would have needed a civil rights movement.
A Supreme Court case that involved the 15th Amendment was United States versus Reese, a court case that happened in 1876. In 1873, election inspector Hiram Reese refused to allow African-American William Garner to vote in a municipal election in Kentucky. This went against the 15th Amendment. U.S. versus Reese was a voting rights case in which the Supreme Court upheld practices such as poll taxes, lottery tests, and grandfather clauses. Although what the men did was against the amendment, it didn't state that there would be a punishment if it was violated. In the end, Garner could vote, but the men that denied him voting were not punished.
Even though the 15th Amendment gave African American people the right to vote, they still were discriminated against. They even went to extremes to have sundown towns or places that did not allow African American people in the town after dark or they would be killed. All white towns did this to keep the towns all white. The 15th Amendment helped, but it didn't give African Americans the full freedoms they should have gotten at the time.
Southern states prevented black citizens from voting by using discriminatory techniques such as racial gerrymandering, literacy test, coupled by grandfather clauses, delegation of authority to private all-white associations, and poll taxes.
Sum it up, we have these U.S. territories across, the world that we don't. We're not letting people there vote for president. But we're taxing them, and the country was founded off of colonists who were angry about taxation without representation, and yet we turn around and do the exact same thing.
Okay. The most recent Supreme Court case dealing with voting rights was Shelby County versus Holder, a 2013 Supreme Court decision that struck down the formula used in Section 4 of the Voting Rights as unconstitutional. The conditions that originally justified these measures no longer characterize voting in the covered jurisdictions. Chief Justice John Roberts wrote in the majority opinion in Shelby. Interestingly, the opinion gave the BRA itself credit for the status of racial discrimination in voting, noting these improvements are in large part because of the Voting Rights Act. So Shelby didn't declare the pre-clearance requirement itself unconstitutional, just a formula that was used since the passage of the BRA to determine who has to be pre-cleared. This means that until Congress passes legislation with a new formula for pre-clearance under Section 4, which doesn't look likely to happen anytime soon, jurisdictions that were covered by the previous formula are free to make election changes without any need to get approval from the federal government.
There is no Negro problem.
Judge Clark stopping you from presenting yourself to register to vote?
There is no Southern problem. There is no Northern problem. There is only an American problem.
After nearly half a century, the U.S. Supreme Court pulled the plug today.
Today, the court heard the most serious challenge to the Voting Rights Act of 1965.
Today, the Supreme Court struck down a key provision of the Voting Rights Act, a landmark civil rights law from 1965.
By 5-4, the U.S. Supreme Court today took the teeth out of a law enacted nearly 50 years ago.
You say that they've gutted it. I don't believe that they have.
Well, I am deeply disappointed with the court's decision in this matter.
The Voting Act of 1965 was the legacy of the 15th Amendment. After this amendment was passed, Congress utilized this power to enforce acts after the result of the amendment caused.
Jim Crow laws were nearly foreseen and denied equality in public as if they were not people.
To be American is to be a hard worker, to do all the things to make yourself have a better life, and having the freedom to choose what you want to do and pursue your own goals.
To be an American means whatever you want it to mean. That's the point of it. You know, there's no set identity in America. And so to be an American is to be whatever you choose to be. To these territories that are essentially operating as colonies for us, that we are extracting resources from, but denying them the right to vote. And that's an outrage. We should be a lot angrier about it than we are. You know, in most states, you know, folks who are in prison oftentimes have lost the right to vote. You know, in some states, if you commit a felony, you have your rights stripped. You have your right to vote stripped forever. It's like we don't just take your citizenship, we take your humanity away from you. We say if you've made this mistake, then you never get to participate again. I think that's also an outrage as well. It's a great amendment. It's important.